Noma, a name whispered in reverence across the fine dining world, 5 times crowned the best restaurant on the planet, a place where a single meal costs more than most people's rent. To the outside world, it's a temple of gastronomy, a place where food is transformed into art, where creativity knows no limits. But this is where the illusion begins, because behind the wild-foraged ingredients, the handcrafted plates, and the Michelin-starred perfection lies a much darker reality. Noma was built on exploitation. Its success wasn't just about creativity, it was about free labor, clever marketing gimmicks, and an industry that thrives on keeping the elite at the top while everyone else is worked to the bone. And now, after 2 decades of ruling fine dining, Noma has declared its own death. But was its so-called closure a genuine admission of failure, or just another carefully orchestrated move to keep the brand alive? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of the biggest lies in the culinary world. René Redzepi was never just a chef. He was an icon, a revolutionary, the so-called mad genius who redefined what it meant to cook. To the culinary world, he was a rock star, the kind of chef that other chefs worshipped, not just for his food, but for his intensity, his obsession with perfection, his relentless pursuit of something beyond just good cooking. His story was almost mythological. An immigrant from Macedonia who struggled to find his place in the rigid, white-dominated world of European fine dining. A misfit who carved out his own space by doing something no one else dared to try: Nordic foraging. At a time when the food world was still obsessed with French techniques and luxury ingredients, Redzepi did the opposite. He refused to use olive oil, lemons, or any foreign imports. Instead, he scoured the forests of Denmark for wild herbs and fermented his own vegetables in underground cellars. The result? A cuisine that was unlike anything else, a style that turned local into the ultimate luxury. And almost overnight, Noma became the mecca of modern gastronomy. Chefs lined up for the chance to work with him. But admiration quickly turned into something else, something more dangerous. Because to be in Redzepi's kitchen wasn't just about learning, it was about enduring. Redzepi had a reputation for being volatile, aggressive, and demanding perfection at all costs. Some called it passion, others called it abuse. Stories circulated of screaming matches in the kitchen, of chefs being pushed to their breaking points. Some left in awe of his genius, others left broken, and yet many still idolized him. Young chefs romanticized the idea of suffering for their craft, believing that working under Redzepi's impossible standards was a necessary step to greatness. It was the fine dining equivalent of a cult, a culture that glorified exhaustion, stress, and borderline abuse, all in the name of excellence. The reality? Noma wasn't just shaping the future of food. It was shaping an entire generation of chefs to believe that suffering was the price of success. And no one questioned it, because if you dared to, you were simply not tough enough for this industry. Behind every delicate, artfully plated dish at Noma was an army of workers, many of whom weren't being paid at all. The fine dining industry is notorious for its reliance on unpaid labor, but Noma took it to another level. For years, it functioned on the backs of stagiaires, interns who worked long, grueling shifts without a paycheck. Some say it was a once-in-a-lifetime learning opportunity, but what did they really learn? Most of these interns weren't honing their culinary skills. Instead, they were doing mind-numbing, repetitive tasks. One former intern, Namrata Hegde, described her experience as 3 months of assembling fruit leather beetles in silence, where even laughter was discouraged. Other interns spent their time picking herbs for hours on end or peeling thousands of walnuts. They weren't experimenting with new flavors or learning techniques from Redzepi. They were cheap labor, keeping the machine running while paying customers marveled at the artistry of their work. At any given time, Noma had around 30 unpaid interns. That means at least a third of its kitchen staff wasn't earning a dime. And yet, this was the best restaurant in the world. A restaurant that charged up to $775 per meal. If it was so successful, why couldn't it afford to pay its workers? The truth is, Noma's labor model wasn't just about tradition, it was about survival. The extreme precision and labor-intensive nature of its dishes required a massive workforce, but paying them all fairly, that would have been financially unsustainable. It wasn't until a New York Times exposé in 2022 that Noma finally announced it would start paying its interns. And the impact was immediate, reportedly adding at least £40,000 to its monthly wage bill. This raised an uncomfortable question. If the best restaurant in the world couldn't survive without unpaid labor, what does that say about the fine dining industry as a whole? Maybe it was never about creativity or artistry. Maybe it was about exploitation all along. If Noma was so deeply rooted in Nordic cuisine, why did it open temporary locations in places like Mexico and Japan? The answer, it turns out, is both practical and strategic. Despite its global reputation, Noma was struggling with financial sustainability. Fine dining is an expensive business, and Copenhagen's strict labor laws made it harder to sustain the unpaid labor model it had thrived on. So, in 2017, Noma took a detour, first to Tulum, Mexico, then later to Kyoto, Japan. These pop-up experiences weren't just about exploring new flavors. They were a financial strategy. A seat at Noma's Mexico pop-up cost $600 per person, and it sold out instantly. The Kyoto experience, $775 per person, excluding drinks. Limited seating, exclusivity, and hype turned these events into massive cash grabs. But there was an irony to it all. The same restaurant that built its name on local Nordic ingredients was now capitalizing on cultures and traditions that had nothing to do with Denmark. For Noma, these pop-ups were more than just culinary experiments. They were survival tactics. In early 2023, Noma made headlines by announcing it would close its doors at the end of 2024, citing the unsustainability of the fine dining model. The plan was to transform into a food lab, focusing on innovation and occasional pop-ups. However, as 2025 unfolds, Noma remains very much active. The restaurant has continued its operations, hosting pop-ups in Kyoto and preparing for new seasons in Copenhagen. This raises a critical question. Was the closure announcement genuine, or merely a strategic move to generate buzz and maintain relevance? Some industry observers suggest that the proclaimed closure was a deflection from mounting scrutiny over Noma's labor practices, including reliance on unpaid interns and controversial labor law practices. By announcing a closure, Noma may have sought to sidestep criticism and rebrand itself without making substantial changes to its operations. Instead of a genuine shutdown, Noma appears to have shifted towards a model that enhances its exclusivity and allure. Limited-time pop-ups and seasonal menus create a sense of scarcity, driving demand among affluent diners eager for unique experiences. This strategy not only keeps Noma in the spotlight, but also allows it to command premium prices, all while maintaining the narrative of a restaurant that has ostensibly closed. Noma prides itself on sustainability, but the reality is far more complicated. Yes, they use local, foraged ingredients. Yes, they avoid mass-produced food. But does that truly make a restaurant sustainable when it serves just 40 guests a night at a price most people could never afford? Noma's experimental dishes often required enormous amounts of prep work, sometimes dozens of ingredients for a single bite. And behind the scenes, massive amounts of food waste piled up. For a restaurant that claimed to be eco-friendly, the model was anything but. Noma wants to be remembered as a legend, a restaurant that redefined food, that pushed the boundaries of fine dining, that changed the way we think about ingredients and sustainability. But here's the truth. Noma wasn't a revolution. It was a scam, a carefully crafted illusion sold to the wealthy, built on free labor, and wrapped in a story so compelling that no one dared to question it. It thrived on exclusivity, on making food inaccessible to all but the elite. It convinced the world that a meal costing the equivalent of a month's rent was somehow worth it. That picking herbs for 16 hours straight, unpaid, was an honor. That a restaurant charging $775 per seat still needed interns working for free, and now, even in its so-called death, Noma still wins. The announcement of its closure was nothing more than a marketing gimmick, a rebranding strategy to make it even more exclusive, even more profitable. And yet, we let it happen. Until next time, keep questioning the hype and your appetite.